Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed that story called From Seed to Plant. And now we are actually going to make our own diagram of the life cycle of a plant. So you are going to need a sheet of paper about yay big, and we are going to keep it turned on its side because we are going to make a circle diagram with arrows. So at the top of your paper, I'd like you to label it the life cycle of a plant. Starting with the. T H E, the life, L I F E, cycle, C Y C L E, the life cycle of O F A, plant, P L A N T. Very good. So your sheet should look like this: the life cycle of a plant. Very good. Now, we know from the story that all plants start out as what? What do we plant in the ground? What do we eat from the center of flowers? What moves from plant to plant and starts over as a brand new cycle of a plant's life? What is the very first thing a plant starts at? Very good. It starts as a seed. So we are going to draw a seed at the top of our paper, right in the middle, under cycle. So just draw a brown seed or a tan seed, a sunflower seed, whatever you want your plant to be. I'm just going to draw a brown seed about yay big. And underneath it, I'm going to write the word seed. S E E E E E E D D. Seed. And I'm going to color that in brown. Once you've colored that in, you are going to draw an arrow going to the next thing that the seed is going to become after it's planted. So first we're going to draw our seed and write seed under it, and then we are going to draw an arrow to the next thing. Your arrow should look like this. Now right here, we're going to leave room to draw the next thing a seed is. So I want you guys to think about it. When we plant a seed, it first is, when we think about like our lima bean seeds, we plant a seed and it has different parts to it. It has a seed coat and an embryo. And the embryo is the part of the seed that has the root and the shoot. The root that grows down into the ground and the shoot that grows up to form the leaves. When the shoot grows up to form the leaves, there is a word for that. It's called a what? Very good. It's called a sprout. After the seed is planted and it's given time in the soil to get nutrients and to get and it gets watered in sunlight, it sprouts up into what's called a sprout. So the next thing we are going to draw is the next phase of a plant's life, which is a sprout. The sprout is going to look like a stem, which is probably going to be green, and it's going to have 2 leaves. Now, that's kind of what a sprout looks like. There's the stem and the 2 leaves. But there's some very, very important parts that we need to add to our picture. Even though we have the stem and the 2 leaves, we need to show that it's sprouting above ground. So with a brown marker, I want you to draw your soil. And I need to get out my brown marker. I want you to draw your soil so it shows that it is sprouting above the soil. Very good. And underneath the soil, we need to draw our roots. Like we learned that the plant shoots up into the sky and the roots grow down. So we are going to draw a few lines to represent our roots. Very good. Now, we may color in our sprout green, but before we do that, we are going to need to label it sprout. So, either next to it, on top, or on the bottom if there's room, I'm going to do mine next to it. We're going to write the word sprout. S, s, s. Very good. S, p, 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 R, O, U, T, 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 T. Very good. Sprout. Awesome. Now we're going to color in our sprout green. And the next thing we are going to do is draw another arrow going to about directly under the seed. And as you can see, we are making like a circle. So this arrow is going to be what lead to the next phase of a plant's life. So we know that it starts as a seed and then it sprouts up above the soil to make a sprout with the stem and the leaves. And then who thinks they know what happens after it's a sprout? It has the leaves, but it doesn't actually have the petals yet. So what actually happens is the plant starts to bud and the petals are folded in and they are getting ready to bloom once it has enough sunlight and the seasons change and it will become a flower. So the next stage of a plant's life is actually called a bud. When a flower starts to bud, it's where the different parts of the flowers grow and develop inside of the bud. After it's ready to bloom, that's when you begin to see the petals. So the next phase of a plant's life is going to be the bud. So we are going to draw something that looks very similar to our sprout, which is going to be a stem. We are going to have our 2 leaves. And then we are going to draw the budding flower head at the top. So your bud should kind of start to look like that. We've got the stem, the budding flower head at the top, and the 2 leaves. Now we have to remember to draw our roots underneath the soil. And we have to remember to draw the soil because this is all happening above ground, above the soil. So your bud should look very similar to this. We've got our stem, our budding flower, and then our 2 leaves. Underneath this, we are going to write the word bud. That is the next phase of a plant's life cycle, is it becomes a bud. Spell it with me. B, B, B. B, U, D, 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 D. Very good. Bud. Nice. Now, we are going to color in our bud green. I'm going to do this at the very end to show you all the final product. But before we do that, there's a last phase of a plant's life cycle that we need to draw an arrow to. So we are going to draw an arrow. And the very last phase of a plant's life cycle is when the petals inside the bud start to bloom and it becomes a what? What have you been taking pictures of and seeing all planted and blooming around in the springtime? Yes, it becomes a flower. Very, very good. And when the petals start to bloom and the flower starts to grow and take in sunlight and water, it becomes an adult plant. It becomes a flower. And a very important thing about a flower is in the middle of the flower are actually where the plant seeds are. So when the seasons change or the wind starts to blow and the seeds are blown away from the middle of the flower, they are blown into somewhere else on the earth where then the flower plants again. So that is a life cycle of the plant. The last phase is the flower. So to draw the flower, we know that we need a stem. We know that we need our leaves. We know that we need the center of our flower where our seeds are. And we need to draw our flower petals. Now, we know that we have our stem, our leaves, the center of our flower where our seeds are, and the petals that have bloomed. But we also need to draw what's underneath the ground. So we need to draw our soil and our roots growing down into the ground. So our soil, we are going to draw again, which is going to be brown. And then our roots, because just because the flower has bloomed does not mean that their roots have gone away. A flower cannot bloom unless the roots are growing into the ground. And its leaves are sprouting and shooting up. Great. So once you've completed this step, before you color in your flower, whatever color it is, depending on the flower you pick, we need to label this flower. So next to it or on top of it, I'm going to do mine under it. We are going to write the word flower. F, L, 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 O, O, W, W, E, R. And there's your flower. Now, these are the 4 phases of a plant's life cycle, but we are missing one thing. We need to draw the arrow going back into the seed, because like I said before, once the flower blooms and the wind blows, the seeds from the middle of the flower are blown away and planted somewhere else, and the whole life cycle starts over again. That's the meaning of a cycle. It's something that happens over and over and over again. And because flowers are living things, they also have a life cycle. So you will need to draw your last arrow and then color in your pictures for your final product. So guys, once you've finished coloring in the life cycle of a plant diagram, it should look very similar to this. You've got your seed that then with water and nutrients from the soil begins to sprout up to have a stem and a leaf. Right here is the sprout, and then it turns into the bud, the budding flower, which is up top, and you can still see the roots going down into the earth, the stem and the leaves. And then once the seasons change, there's enough sunlight and water involved, the actual petals begin to blossom and bloom, and it blooms into a beautiful flower where our seeds are still in the very center, and after they are blown away from the wind, they are blown into a new part of the earth where they are planted again, and the cycle starts over. Now, in a very important part from the life cycle of a plant, as we saw in the story that we read, is a lot of times food, fruits, and vegetables grow on plants, right? So a lot of times you'll see plants like a tomato plant, an apple tree, things like that. So, and a very, very important thing to understand is if a flower had a fruit growing off of it, it would have the fruit growing in between the stem and the flower, right? Whatever fruit that might be. You might see this when you see fruits growing on trees, such as an apple tree or a peach tree, or people growing fruits and vegetables in their yards. So the fruit would grow in between the stem and the flower. If you would like to draw fruit growing in between your stem and flower or your stem and tree, you may on your life cycle of a plant, because you can personalize it and make it your own. I will post my final document onto the Facebook page, but this is what your life cycle of a plant should look like, and I'm so excited to see your work.